What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Empowered Athlete Podcast. It's your host, Natty Boss, and I'm here with a very special guest and friend of mine, Ms. Darion Murdock. And we've had many conversations in the past around this topic, and we're bringing it to the podcast today. And I know that you guys are going to love it and get so much out of it. We're going to be talking about optimizing your jiu-jitsu training with cycle syncing. This is a question that I get inundated with. And Darion loves talking about this, so I wanted to let her take the reins on this and share her perspective and her experience and everything that she knows as far as her knowledge and wisdom around this topic, so you guys can feel empowered in this area and hopefully walk away with a lot of tools, a lot of knowledge on how to cycle sync around your training. Darion, a little bit about her. She's a healthcare professional turned tech nerd with a passion for a women's healthy lifestyle. She's currently a purple belt in jiu-jitsu and has been an athlete her whole life. She loves to work with women who are driven to perform well. And she'll probably share more of her story, but after a terrible experience with hormonal birth control, she dove deep into women's health to better understand herself and is now helping other women work in harmony with their cycles instead of fighting against it, which I know is something that we often do as women in the society. So I'm really excited for her to dive into that. She enjoys spending time in nature, doing puzzles, training, coaching women toward developing greater health, strength, and happiness. Darion and I first met years ago, I believe, in role model camp, and we hit it off right from the bat. And she's such a beautiful soul, beautiful energy, and I'm excited for her energy to impact and inundate you because I know it'll be a positive experience. So Darion, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor and such a sweet opportunity to be on your podcast because it's an amazing podcast. And there are days where I've just picked up my Natty Boss and I'm like, okay, I got this. I could do this. Natty said I could do it. I could do it.
That literally makes me so happy. Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Yes. Side note, if you haven't listened to the 9 principles of nutrition, do it. Stop this, go do that, and then come back. But yeah, it was really good.
Love that one. Oh, so good. So good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's shift towards you. And as always, I love to just kind of educate the listeners on the interview guests of, your story, so they get to connect a little bit with you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so I found jiu-jitsu through my husband, who had been training for maybe 6 years before I had any interest, and I didn't understand what he was doing, obviously. And I remember dropping him off because he had this one brown belt in town and they would just train together because it was a small town. I would drop him off and then I'd pick him up and I'd be like, why do you look like a wet dog? What is wrong with you? Are you okay? What are you doing in there? I was so confused. I was just like, whatever, shower, don't touch me, whatever. But I was really, really into yoga, every day, multiple hours a day, just rolling around my living room floor. And I just liked the way movement felt. And he noticed kind of oh, she's kind of doing some solo drills in her yoga flows. Maybe I can make a bridge here. And eventually he did, and then convinced me to go to a seminar with Steve Maxwell, who was someone I followed for health and longevity and just overall holistic wellness. And I was like, well, I don't care what the seminar is about. It's Steve Maxwell. Do you have a gi I could wear? So that's how I ended up getting introduced, met really funny, awesome people there. And then went to a second seminar, eventually started going to classes, and here we are today.
Amazing. Yeah, Steve Maxwell is an OG. And a funny story, I don't know that I ever knew that about you, but he is connected to us and my husband, who owned a gym for a long time. He actually took over the original gym in Philadelphia from Steve Maxwell.
Get out of town.
Yeah.
Get out of town. That's crazy. Yeah, that's Steve's a G.
Our initial gym used to be called Maxercise, named after Maxwell. And we owned it. And my husband owned it for many years, literally up until we rebranded just a couple years ago. And then we had to close it down when we moved to Texas. But that was in business for a long time. And that's where my husband actually started. So he's crazy. OG alongside Steve Maxwell. They actually traveled the country to teach kettlebells. And I mean, more than the country, they traveled the world to teach kettlebells and do kettlebell certifications, which is where I got certified as well. So that is literally such a cool circle.
I love that. Yeah, he's awesome. I got to do a training with him once, aside from the seminar where it was just us. and we paid for like an hour, but he is so sweet. Like he spent almost 4 hours with us, just like took us through a training. We had like a whole list of questions he let us go through. Super nice guy.
Amazing. So let's talk a little bit about your health journey and how did you come to learn about cycle syncing and how it's impacted your health, your jiu-jitsu journey as well with cycle
Yeah.
syncing, but kind of starting with your health journey of what got you into, as we kind of alluded in the intro.
Yeah. So I'd gotten into like studying and learning and understanding the phases and stuff in my early 20s, late teens ish. And honestly, I'm not sure what sparked it. I think actually being in a relationship and like deciding to be in a committed relationship at that time, I you get a lot of reflection when you start relationship. And I was seeing things like, why is this happening? And I would see these different shifts happening and be super sensitive to them, to the point where I thought something was wrong with me. Like I thought I had some severe mental disorder or bipolar or something, because I was like, this shit is coming out of nowhere. Like I was happy-go-lucky 2 days ago and now I'm bawling for no reason. Like, what is happening here? So I thought it was crazy, straight up.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting onto birth control relationship, because that's what I knew to do. Like that's what older women of that time told me to do. That's what is kind of just like conventionally recommended. Like if you don't want to have a baby, take this hormonal birth control, you're good to go. And I was like, okay. So I took the
Yeah.
lightest dose because at the time, and still I'm kind of like not a big fan of pills. Like I, one, don't like taking them. Two, I like to do everything else possible before I have to take them.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like, okay, what's the lowest dose? I'll take that because like I eat a banana and things go crazy. So I need to make
Yeah.
sure it's like light.
Yeah.
And it ended up wrecking me and almost my relationship. Luckily, I have the most amazing partner on the earth, but I became like super suicidal. I was crying all the time. I didn't have any desire for like zero libido, which is ironic because they're like, you can have, but guess what? You won't want to. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it was very, very just shattering. And I had one night where I remember just like losing it, thinking that no one would understand me. This was the end. I might as well just give up now. Like all of these very negative thoughts. And that was the day I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to stop this because that this is the only thing that's changed since
Yeah.
these thoughts and before. So that sparked me to look into this book, and I'll list all these books at the end, but this woman, Kelly Brogan, she's a psychiatrist, and she started in traditional psychiatry and then has progressed also to have a more holistic view. And now she's pivoted her career to help people taper off of different medications, whether they be psychiatric drugs, birth control, you name it. So that's kind of how and what sparked me to look into this and to really, instead of fearing what was happening, try to learn more about it and understand more about it. And it turns out it's normal. Like I was freaking out for no reason.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So you were adopting cycle syncing. Obviously, was this before jujitsu?
hmm
And then did you immediately start integrating that into your jujitsu journey, or did it take you a while to kind of figure out that you can mesh the two?
Took me a while. And to be entirely honest, it took me a long time to cycle sync anything, let alone jujitsu, because I'm sure a lot of women, especially on this podcast and on your platform in particular, will relate. Like, we have a lot of yang energy. Like, we want to get shit done. We are go-getters. If we're resting, we're like, what's going on? Something needs to be happening. We should
Yeah.
not be resting. Like, it feels like a waste of time. And so I had that mentality, and I still have that mentality. And I still have to look at myself and be like, hey, these are your feminine weeks. It can wait. Like, you are more important than getting something done. It can wait. So when I first started training, I had like, the white belt bug where you're just like,
Yeah.
this is amazing. I'm going every day.
Yeah.
So I was doing that, but it wasn't a super intense class. It was like, I think an hour or something, and a kind of a smaller class, but every day I was going and training. And then as I moved through belts, especially during blue belt, that's when I realized like, I think I'm working against myself in a lot of ways, because I would try to push and try to, you know, in jiu-jitsu culture, there's like the team no sleep. There's the like grind or die. Nobody cares, work harder.
Yeah.
I hate that. I'm not gonna lie. I straight up hate it. Like
Yeah.
certain moments, super helpful. Not the band-aid statement for everything.
Yes.
Um, and so I was realizing I was like trying to meet these expectations that I didn't even create for myself, that I just assumed and assimilated from the jiu-jitsu culture. And then quickly realized I was showing up to class, watching technique and being like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Why? Because I was burnt out. Like I didn't even want to be there. So it
Yeah.
was like, I realized that I was actually shooting myself in the foot by forcing myself to go, and really I could have just used a bath or studied some. If I really, really wanted to study technique, I could just watch some videos.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
how it like meshed into jujitsu eventually.
Yeah. Awesome. And so for those who have no idea what it is, what is cycle syncing and what are the benefits?
Yeah. So cycle syncing is actually a term that is coined by Elisa Vitti. She is the author of one of the books I'll recommend called Woman Code. And it basically means shifting your diet, exercise, and lifestyle habits to align with the stages of your cycle instead of fighting against them. So, for example, I would probably avoid like trying to lift my heaviest weight or something like that, like hitting a PR during the pit of my luteal phase. Like that's just not the time to push yourself for physical and emotional reasons. And there's a whole bunch of science on like timing different lifts and how to progress and deload for a woman around her cycle.
Beautiful. And what are some of the benefits when it comes to maybe just like mental benefits, physical benefits
Yeah.
um, of applying cycle syncing? How can
First
it
off,
impact and improve somebody's life?
yeah, the first thing you'll notice is that you won't feel like you're crazy. That's like a good thing. Awareness is everything. And the other thing for me that it did dramatically, it helped give me a compass. It helped me understand where I was and why I was having certain needs. Sometimes these needs come up in us and we're like, that's stupid. Like we judge ourselves as soon as it comes up. But this map helps you to have context so that you're not living in that self-judgment bucket all the time. It's a terrible place to be. So then when you're approaching training, for example, and you wake up, you get, the routine of putting on your spats and tying your pants, and then you're just like, oh, like you have that like, I don't really want to do this type of thing. And then you start judging yourself of like, well, what's wrong with you? Don't you want to meet your goals? Come on, just get over it. Like you have this inner dialogue that starts. And instead of like jumping on the train of that dialogue, you can think to yourself, wait a minute, where am I in my cycle? Am I about to start my period? Am I over the hump of ovulation? Like what's going on here? And once you pinpoint that, it can help you understand and justify why that inner critic is saying what it's saying, or why you're experiencing certain resistance or increase in resistance to showing up.
Love that. Love that. So let's dive a little deeper into the phases of our cycle. So can you explain the four parts of our cycle and more to speak to each phase, how female athletes in each phase can adjust their training during that
Mhm.
instead of fighting against it?
Yes, I'm going to explain these phases. And before I even get there, just know that we don't live in a world of perfection. Like you can know your phases, you can be like, I'm menstruating, but you
Yeah.
have to go freaking like carry your kid across the field, even though you don't want to because you're cramping and you'd rather take a nap. Like sometimes that is what's going to happen, but the awareness can help you live those moments more gracefully. So as I say these, it's not hard set black and white. Like you'll hear it in the first example, but we'll start with menstrual phase. This is the phase that we are bleeding. Our uterus is shedding the uterine lining or the endometrium. And really, when I'm talking about these phases, I want you to think about the body as kind of like a drum. And any event that happens in this drum is going to reflect and reverberate through all the rest of your bodies, your emotional body, your spiritual body, etc. So that sense of loss, even though it's normal, it's natural, it's totally cool, it's still being processed as loss emotionally. And that's something we fail to recognize. We're just like, get out of here. Ugh, you're stopping my flow. Like, but really it's a time to understand and acknowledge that and practice dealing with loss. For training during the menstrual phase, I used to have a strict rule of no pressure to train on days 1 and 2. Like the first day you start and the second day when you're the most bloated, you're the most crampy, you're the most cranky. I have never forced myself to train on those days. And there are days that I broke the rule because I felt good. I was like, and actually, there are days where I showed up to train and then started because the movement and the exercise was what was actually needed. So like I said, it's not black and white, but it'll help you understand what to do for yourself, knowing that you're bleeding. I recommend, if you can, this is a great time to really emphasize recovery. Resting. If you absolutely have to drill and you have to move and you're training for a competition or you want to be the best in the world, this is a time for light drills, for studying technique. We're not going ham during menstrual phase. We're just refining, maybe tuning some things up before our next time of going ham. The next phase is
like yoga. Is that like a good thing here?
yes,
Yoga, cycling,
yes.
like on the bike or something like that.
Yep, like light, long cardio. That's a like low intensity is kind of the theme of menstrual phase. And a lot of times it'll help your body, one, process the loss, and it will move things along as opposed to just kind of like laying there in the fetal position crying,
Yeah.
which that's totally cool too. Next phase is follicular phase. I think of follicular phase like springtime. If you observe the seasons and you notice how things change, people are coming outside more, we're planting things, we're starting to build, we're taking things that we planned in winter or menstrual phase and we're starting to act upon them. So follicular phase is a great time to start taking small actions, start dripping in harder trainings. It doesn't have to be like, 2 hours of hard rounds the whole time, but at least 5, throughout the week, where you felt pushed, like you can start pushing a little bit progressively. So if it's the first couple of days of follicular phase, like moderate intensity, and then you can slowly progress to a little bit higher intensity as you're approaching ovulation. Ovulation is like our peak time. It's like the summer. It's like the most amazing thing on earth. Like everything's great. You're like a small child, just like, look at the clouds. I feel like, what's that? Oh, I feel like Snow White, who's just like dancing around with the animals, like, like during ovulation, like everything's perfect. And we can optimize that too. If you can schedule competitions, performances, super fights around ovulation, do it. Not always going to happen. And we'll talk about that as well. But this is the time where you are the performer. Like you are literally radiating heat and you are just kind of like, I don't know, like you're an attractor. Like you are pulling things towards you during ovulation. So it's a good time to kind of hit your max. So the hardest training should stop at ovulation. Couple days you can get away with after ovulation, but 1 or 2 days after, then we're moving into luteal phase and it's time to start thinking about slowing down. Ovulation is tricky too because we do have a little drip of, I think it's called relaxin. It's like a hormone that kind of softens your tissues. There's just a tiny drip of that happens during ovulation. So if you do push yourself past, you are at risk for injury around this time. So it's this weird balance of like, I'm on top of the world, but I can't like go too hard because I could injure myself. So it's like, you really have to walk that middle ground for ovulation specifically. And then finally, luteal phase, which is like the fall. Things are dying straight up. Like you start feeling like you're dying a little bit. This is where our inner critic becomes the loudest. Like we start to really judge ourselves. We start to really get self-critical. And if you have the awareness during this time, you can pivot that for the positive. Like it doesn't have to be bad. You can just think like, oh yeah, some of our self-critical thoughts can have truth in them. And so instead of taking it personally, you can look at it and kind of be like, that might be something to look at for this next cycle, and kind of take note during luteal phase instead of taking it like it's tied to your worth.
Yeah.
Luteal phase is the time to slow down though. Like the beginning of luteal phase, it's about sometimes 14 to 16 days. Ovulation is our shortest phase, but the first half of luteal phase is kind of like winding down. So you can have a couple of hard trainings, but you're going to start to just go through the motions again, whether that's with jujitsu, lifting, whatnot. The volume is just going to turn down. And it's a good time for just, like I said, reflection. And this is I say this with caution because if you're super self-critical, might go the wrong way for you. But if you have a hold on this and you aren't taking your own self-criticism personally, it's a great time to look at your old matches and just be like, whoa, what was a girl doing then? Like, take
Perfect.
notes.
I literally just released an episode around how to overcome failure and bounce back from losses. So that, and part of that is looking at your old matches. So that's a perfect time to do it, is like find where you are in luteal phase, and maybe that will ease the blow a little bit in watching those old matches and put you in a good space to move back into, you know, processing that and working towards those goals. So that's like a beautiful mesh of that.
Yeah, totally. And as long as you aren't attached to like how you look or your performance that you're reviewing, it will go well. But if you start reviewing it and you're like, you piece of crap, just stop. Like, stop and wait for another phase to where you're in a better mental space. But it is a good time for just like, it's a avenue to drive that self-critic into something productive of like, oh yeah, probably should have kept my frames. Cool.
Yeah. Amazing. And one thing I wanted to note here that I thought was interesting was how on top of the world you can be for ovulation, and then like the wind down phase of luteal, because they're right next to each other. You know, I feel like that's where maybe a lot of us can perhaps feel like we shift into that craziness, or we get really down on ourselves because we're like, what the hell? I literally was feeling amazing last week on top of the world. And then this week I feel like absolute shit. What happened? Right. And then, like you said, we start to like blame ourselves and criticize ourselves because we're like, what did I do wrong? I was literally feeling amazing, hitting everything. I was the hammer in training, and now this week I'm the nail. What did I do?
Yeah.
And just recognizing that it could have just been a shift in our menstrual cycle and the hormones changing. And then again, like you said, just being aware of where you're at and honoring where you're at can give yourself some grace of like, oh, this makes sense, making sense out of it instead of not understanding it and therefore like blaming or judging yourself.
Yeah. And you can kind of time it too. Like, I'll feel, and I will get into tracking and stuff too, because I think that's one of the first steps, but I'll feel like amazing during ovulation. I'll tell the whole world, like shout it through the house, literally, I'm ovulating. like, get ready, it's time to party. But then like, as soon as that happens, I've already trained myself. I'm like, oh, we got to prepare because we're going to start walking down the stairs, and I need to have like things in place to where I feel supported during that, because that's the time where we often don't feel heard. We don't feel supported. Feels kind of like the world is just like crumbling for no reason, but it's not. And there's ways that you can support yourself during that time.
I love that. And one of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit, you've touched on the seasons and you kind of pointed to each of the phases coinciding or using an analogy around the seasons. And so alongside that, we've also talked about a little bit of having that yang energy and that yin, right? Which is also that masculine and that feminine energy. So which, for those listening, the parts of the cycle, which would be classified more as the masculine energy and more of the feminine energy. So people can kind of just connect the dots there, because that is a topic I talk about a lot, but just to kind of mesh it with the cycles.
Yeah. So a menstrual phase and follicular phase, let's see, ovulation phase and luteal phase. Okay, I had to like run through them to remember which ones are feminine and masculine. Luteal phase and menstrual phase are feminine. If you think about the fall, like things falling or that downward motion is feminine. A lot of times, unfortunately, negativity versus positivity, negativity is going to be more feminine because the feminine takes things in, and you have to have negative space to do that. The more masculine phases are follicular phase and ovulation. The way I remember these is through the seasons. Like, I learn and hold information best when I can tie it to nature. And so I just think about, when is the sun out? The sun is the most masculine thing on earth. It's father sky. And so ovulation, summertime, you're actually warmer. You are like a little sun at that time. And then follicular phase is the spring. That's when the sun's starting to like progress. So those are the two masculine.
Beautiful. So it's almost like the spring and summer would be our masculine, and the fall and winter is our feminine. And I feel like that's pretty easy to remember because naturally that's how we feel. When it comes spring and summer, we feel that pep in our step and we feel like we are ready to tackle the world. And then we all collectively want to grab our little snuggies, get some warm tea and cuddle up come fall, come winter. So again, I feel like not going to be completely out of the blue for those listening of like, oh yeah, everything that feels natural, I feel naturally inclined to during those seasons makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's just condensed to a month for us every single month. But it's kind of cool and empowering to think like we are innately aligned with the way Mother Nature creates. Like it's embedded. We cannot escape it. So we better, you know,
Embrace it.
yeah, you can't beat them, join them. So
Exactly. Yeah. And a big question I get asked a lot that I'd love for you to speak to is, like you said, it's not black and white. In a perfect world, we could do all of these things and gradually integrate into each phase. But, life is going to present itself. We're going to just have situations where Pan Am's is during one of our low parts of our cycle, right? And so doesn't mean that we can't do Pan Ams because of our cycle. So when it comes to competition and athletes who have to compete on their cycle, what advice do you have for them in navigating that? I mean, provided it's maybe one of the lower months. If it's one of the, more powerful months or parts of our cycle rather, then obviously then you can really capitalize that on your performance. But what happens when it becomes those fall and winter aspects of our cycle? How do we navigate that so we can still perform and not feel held back by it?
totally. It's a great question. I think the biggest battle here is mental, to be honest. We can feel a little bit physically out of our prime during this time, I guess, but um, I think mentally you will do your best if you take off the pressure from yourself. It's okay to have that pressure when you're riding high because you have a bit more natural trust in yourself during that time. Like you literally think you're the shit during ovulation. So like it's only going to help you. But during menstruation or like especially the end of luteal phase where you're really critical and you're probably the most bloated at that time, I think it's really important to make sure that you frame your performance and competing in a healthy, positive way. And it might be a time where you have to tell yourself you're going out there to have fun, just so that you actually go out there and have fun instead of focusing on, the fifth match or like trying to get onto the podium. Like really focus on presence, especially if you're bleeding during your competition, because there's actually really good, I have found personally, like when I honor the rest during luteal phase and it comes to bleeding time and I'm back into training, stuff is clicking together like crazy. And it's not like I'm not ballistic, I'm not powerful, I'm not any of those more yang things. It's technically things are starting to flow better and we are literally in our flow. So that's a good time to trust your technique and to trust where your body is and know that your technique is going to flow together. It might not be like you bench press someone off of you, which you shouldn't be anyway, but like, it's a time
Yeah.
where you can just allow trust in your body, really. Like it's our body's reactions that are going to help us win a match or succeed in our performance. And I think during menstrual phase, it's a good time to just really lean into that trust. Like I've done the work, I might be bleeding, but my body still knows what it's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so beautiful because that's a big topic I talk about a lot is learning how to trust your body. And I often say that, in order to trust ourselves, one of the foundations of that is feeling safe in our body. And with what you're speaking to, just understanding the cycles, I think that there is a level of safety created just by understanding how your body works. And just by understanding what your cycle's like, there's a level of safety and comfort in knowing because it's predictable. Like you
Mhm.
can understand what the next part is and then have those associated tools and support systems and whatever it is to navigate each part of that cycle, which creates a level of safety. And then from that foundation of safety, you can then lean more into that trust because that's really a huge part of it too.
Totally.
So let's dive into a little bit of the societal beliefs that most likely are probably more yang, but I'll let you
Mhm.
do the talking on that. But what societal beliefs do you feel prevent women from adjusting their training using this cycle syncing approach?
Yes. So we touched on this a little bit, but team no sleep, hustle till you die, grind or die. Like I hear that stuff and it's great for certain phases. Like when you are in the phase where it's a good time to push out of your comfort zone, go ahead, eat all that up. But when you look at nature, she doesn't work like that. And she gets everything done in perfect timing, flawlessly. And we are no different. And so, society is so focused on productivity, production. What have you made? What have you done? What have you learned? What have you achieved? Like, it's all external. And when we are so focused on that, that is setting ourselves up to pour from empty cups, because we only have so much. We cannot escape our nature of being like nature. Like, we just can't. You can for a period of time, but it will burn you out. Like, there's
Yes.
no free lunch. You either eat the lunch now, or you are force fed it later. So like, you get the choice. But I think that is a big piece of how society kind of makes us feel bad for having these slower periods, or these times of processing and planning and culling to a certain point, like pulling out the weeds.
Yeah.
Those moments are super valuable for the other moments to thrive as fully as possible.
100%. Going back to that balance of the masculine and the feminine, both are essential, and just finding that balance between both, that idea of, when you are maybe, depending if you're in a certain phase where you would serve best to unwind, like Darion said, letting that give you permission to, even if you go to class, like, don't get caught up in the usually self-judgment, because nobody's probably judging you other than yourself, but like taking a rest round, right? Like, rest rounds are like a big thing that are just like taboo. I think they're becoming a little bit more accepted because of the mental health movement, which is amazing. But like, more than the mental health movement, we don't need a mental health movement to just take a rest round off.
Yeah.
Like, really honoring your body, and it goes without fail. Every single time I can convince an athlete to do that, there's all the fear that comes up, all the stories, all that comes up, all the chatter in their mind, but yet they always come back to me and say, wow, that was well needed. And like, I actually performed better when I did that. And there's a reason why, because you're working with your body. And a big like narrative to switch this is really recognizing, which is a huge thing, is like that rest is productive, right? Because our society, like you said, like focuses on productivity, focuses on achievement. And we only see this as like an external, tangible thing. But really, how we need to reframe it and also view productivity is that resting is productive, because we're working with ourselves. And when we work with ourselves, we reduce that resistance, which allows more flow and ease. And then when we're feeling more flow and ease, we can do things with less effort, which allows us to be more productive, exerting less. So it's like this really counterintuitive aspect, but productivity isn't just what you're putting out. Sometimes productivity is like doing nothing and just like resting. And like you said, what are some other areas that I can focus on that are not training related, but can still like support me and work on other aspects of my overall health and performance and well-being? And recognize that that is enough. And that's me being productive in a different way than what society deems as productive.
Totally. Yeah. And I've had experiences where I'll like walk up to the competition mat and I look at my, competitor, my opponent, and I can feel the energetic drain that she's going through. Like, I can feel like, oh, you trained last night. Like, I can tell. I have a strict no training 3 days before I compete. Like, there's a concept called disassociation like physically, as far as like exercise performance goes. And it's basically like pretending you don't do what you do for a chunk of time, doing something entirely different, like balancing on a ball, handstands, going for a jog, hula hooping, whatever, not jujitsu related. When you give your brain that breath, it's almost like an inhalation. Like, the whole time that we're processing and thinking and focusing on jujitsu, it's a long exhale. We got to breathe in at some point or we die. So like, that disassociation is a time for your brain to just like breathe it all in, process it. It gives your body time to assimilate all of the training that you've had and done. I've seen the difference when competitors train all the way up until the competition. They are drained, they are weaker, and they're not as excited to be there. When you take the break, all of that stuff is the opposite. And I've had success because I've been like, yeah, she's tired and I'm over here fresh. Like, I got a full banana in my belly. I haven't trained in 3 days. I'm ready to kill something. So like, here we go.
100%. And like on the science aspect of that too, that is literally a concept of integrating this week for Pan Ams, but this concept of athletic peaking, it's the same concept, but
Yep.
where you're giving your body and your mind that rest leading up to it. So you're refreshed the day of when you can like give it your all. And that can also work, especially if you notice where you're at in your cycle. You know, if you're in one of those lower phases, that's even more critical for you to recognize that that's a period of rest and not get caught up in I'm not doing enough or whatever it is leading up to it, and recognize that that is going to prepare you best for the competition of the day of, because you're going to have to give it your 110%. So you might as well rest and fill your cup up as much and overflow it as much as you can those days leading up to it. So you have that excess to be able to put into it.
Mhm.
And that's really, really important, that I recommend a lot for athletes, is that same concept that you're speaking to. And the other thing to note on that is, again, like you said, the processing, the integrating of what you're learning, the techniques clicking together, that could only happen when there's space in our body to be able to integrate and to process that information. And when we're constantly learning and doing, the energy is, it's like we're filled and there's no spaciousness for things to digest, to
Mhm.
process. So there needs to be that balance of retaining or like kind of absorbing information and then giving it time and space to process. Otherwise, we're going to experience the analysis paralysis,
Mhm.
and we're not going to know, we're not going to actually integrate it. And therefore, that's where those things usually come up with athletes. Like, I go to class 5 times a week and I can't remember anything. It's
Yeah.
like, because maybe you don't have to go 5 times a week. Maybe if you went 3 times a week and you were super present and alert and focused, then the other couple days you can actually process. And then by the time you go back, it's all clicking together. And that's how you progress your performance.
Mhm. Totally. Yes, I agree with especially the frequency thing. And it's also a huge factor in injury prevention. Like if you're
Yes,
going in burnt out and you're about to give 100% when you only have 60, like you're going to blow something and then you're out for even longer. So it's better to take that rest again, eat your lunch early, than have to be force fed it later.
100%. So what's one piece of advice you would offer women looking to get started with cycle syncing? Like, what's one easy step that they can take today?
I would say like starting to track, starting to it starts with tracking, and then you start understanding and feeling these different sensations where you can kind of like infer. Um, but tracking, it's similar to like food, like it gives you this awareness of what's happening when it's happening, and that'll help you time other things in your life. Um, there's a book that I'm going to recommend towards the end here called Taking Charge of Your Fertility. This is an amazing book because it gives you tools where all you need is pen and paper and a willingness to be close to your body, to understand where you are in your cycle. So it's like, I just love it because it's not an app. It's not a super expensive
Yeah.
thermometer or something, which I invested in. It's worth it if you got it. And if you're with a partner, make them pay for half, because like I'm just saying, it's like takes two to tango. But it's just nice because it's pen and paper and super simple. But I would start to understand your cycle. You should be able to, like a good goal, if someone was like, hey, where are you at in your cycle? You should be like, oh yeah, straight up follicular phase. Like what's going on? Like you should be able to rattle that off without it being like stressful or having to look at something or something like that. Because that awareness, like I said, is an inner compass for you. It's,
Yeah.
and for the people around you. Like we actually I have like a little dry erase board, and we have 4 little tiles and a little magnet, and I move it along the phases so that like my partner knows this is where I'm at. And like if you come at me with hard criticism during luteal phase, you might get bitten back. Like
That is amazing.
just letting you know. And it's been transformational in our communication. Like he sees it and he's like, okay, what's the weather like today? Ooh, looks like we're in summer. All right, we party and let's go. Like he can, without having to have that awkward conversation every single time of like,
Yeah.
here I am making
Yeah.
it about you. It's like this kind of just in the background thing. Like if you want to
Objective.
know, it's
Yeah.
very clear.
Is that like an Amazon purchase?
No, girl, it's dry erase board. Like I just drew some squares with the dry erase marker.
I
And then
thought
you
it was
just,
like legitimately like the phases were little magnets and you
oh,
move
that would be cool.
them.
No, it's
Okay.
just some cheap magnet and some dry erase
Oh,
squares that I drew.
okay. We use our imagination.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. And so you mentioned just a tracker that you use. What is the tracker that you use since you
Yeah.
recommended it?
So I started with Tony Weschler's Taking Charge of Your Fertility to learn how to track it on paper just for like foundations, like don't try to skip to purple belt when you're still a white belt, learn the basics. Um, so I did that. And then kind of like in doing that, I could feel certain things. Like I'd get a little cramp and I'd be like, must be ovulation because it's not time for bleeding and it's like a tiny little cramp. It's kind
Yeah.
of to the right, like those kind of things you start to feel, or like you wake up and you're really hot in the morning, like you're probably ovulating or you've passed ovulation because it's all based on your body temperature on how this tracking works. Since then, I had convinced my partner to invest in a Daisy thermometer, which has some controversy because some people are like, they're tracking your cycles and they're gonna, I don't know, do something crazy with that information. Like, I get that. So if you don't like that, do not get a Daisy, go with the paper. But Daisy, super convenient because all you do is wake up, you pop this thermometer in your mouth. It's got pretty little lights on it. And it'll just tell you there's different colors. So like, it's really helpful for if you're trying to avoid pregnancy as well, because the different colors coordinate more to that sense. So if it's red, you're fertile. Don't do it without protection. Like you're going to be in trouble. If it's green, you're like, this is a window, like you can get away with it. You like, there's, I don't know, like 94% chance you're not going to get pregnant if you have unprotected sex during the green time. And then there's like a little pink flash that kind of shows you like your period's coming like in 1 to 3 days. And you'll see that for a few days. And then you just click hold it so that you can track the days that you're bleeding. And it learns about you because it is like a piece of software.
Yeah.
So that's the cool part where after you've tracked for 3 months with Daisy, you can plug it into your app and you can predict the future pretty much and be like, well, let's move the vacation to this time because I do not want to be bleeding at the beach. So like you can
That's
kind of
so fun.
forecast. Yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. That's super cool. I love that. Technology's wild.
it is crazy. But that one I've had for like 4 or 5 years and I've loved it.
Okay, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
I'll put the link for those interested in the show notes just to check out the website to them if that's your fancy. And then lastly, just are there any, you've already mentioned a few and we'll put them in the show notes for sure, but any more resources or books that you recommend, resources that you offer and or books that you've learned and read along the way of your journey for those looking to dive deeper into understanding hormone health and cycle syncing?
totally. So I personally have a course on this. Natty signed up for it and
Yes,
it's
it
this
is
kind of
amazing. I
basic.
highly recommend it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's this basic kind of understanding, but it's got visuals. It's just more easy to digest for me when I can see pictures of things like, oh, this is how this hormone flows and this is how this hormone changes. Like you'll be able to see that kind of information. And then we break down food, lifting, and life on how to tailor certain things to the different phases. But that whole course is built on the backbones of these women that I'm going to present to you today. So we have Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Tony Weschler. That is like, they need this in high schools as a textbook, mandatory for all females. Like, if you ask me, if I could have learned this stuff earlier, good God, I would have had so much less suffering. So Taking Charge of Your Fertility, Woman Code by Elisa Vitti. She has a lot of information about foods specifically, like things like which proteins are the best to have during which phase. Turns out salmon's really great for ovulation. Like, who would have thought? So there's like small little details like that if you really want to get into it. Fix Your Period by Nicole Jardim. I recommend this book if I mentioned like, hey, track your cycle, and you like kind of had a small panic attack when I said that. This is a good book for you. Or especially if you are on hormonal birth control, because the artificial hormones are going to hijack your entire natural cycle. So it's going to be almost impossible to track accurately because you're taking fake hormones instead of your own body's hormones expressing themselves. But Fix Your Period by Nicole Jardim will help you if you are interested in learning how to track naturally and to have a natural cycle. She'll help you get there. Hormonal by Marty Hasselton. Really, really insightful book. I learned so much about hormones and kind of the disservice we've had as women as far as science goes. Like, we just got lumped in with men. like they didn't really study female rats. It was
Yeah.
just male rats. So a lot of the information we have that's science-based is biased towards men.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information about this like the few studies she could find that were on females. And then A Mind of Your Own by Kelly Brogan. That is a really good book for tapering off of really any drugs, but I think the focus is really on birth control and like SSRIs and antidepressants and things like that to do it in a safe way, because it can be even tapering off of birth control can be very unsafe if you just stop out
Yeah.
of nowhere. So that's a good resource too.
Beautiful. Yes. We'll put all those links and book recommendations in the show notes for sure. And I'd love to kind of dive into how women can personally connect with you more. Obviously, like I said, we'll share your Teachable course in the show notes, but what are the best ways for people to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm kind of old school, like send a girl an email. Like I will see it. Which is funny, that's old school now. Like it used to be letters we'd write each other in high school, but an email, or if you direct message me on Instagram at Miss D Fit, DEE, I will always respond to direct messages on there. Yeah,
Is
just
there a
really to
website that you'd like people to, do you have a website at all?
I used to, but I've just narrowed it down to the Teachable site because pretty much everything is on there.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we'll make sure we add that. And then finally, I always love to ask the jujitsu practitioner guests, what is your favorite submission or takedown?
Yes, I could not pick or, so I put a takedown and a
Most people
submission.
don't.
Yeah, like I like it all. My favorite takedown is an arm drag to the body lock. Like I want to get close and snuggly and then slam you into the floor. Like it's great.
Yes.
Um, and then my favorite submission, I was on the fence with this. I was actually talking with my husband about it, like philosophically, like, well, if you think about self-defense, like we were getting really into it to pick this, but I picked the rear naked choke from the back. My
Oh,
other option was triangle because ladies, we got thicker thighs. It's like really empowering to just kill someone with your legs. But from a self-defense point of view, the rear naked choke is just like meat and potatoes. It's just like, it's classic. Can't go wrong.
really is. I love that so much. Well, this was an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your story. And there are lots of gold nuggets here for women to take away. One thing I want to tell the audience here is just don't be overwhelmed by this information because it can be a lot. You know, I was going to say I was a woman my whole life because I was and still am. And it wasn't until my late 20s I even knew what the 4 phases were. So like wherever you're at in life, no pressure. There's no shame that you didn't learn this because as Darion mentioned in the beginning, we didn't learn this really in school. At least I know I didn't. I went to an all-girl Catholic high school. You think that would have been a part of the curriculum, and it probably wasn't because they probably wanted to just keep us ignorant towards our cycle, whatever the reason is. But the long story short of it is I really didn't know anything and couldn't really feel empowered in that area because of that. So it doesn't matter where you're at, but using these resources, using this episode, starting with, using this as a starting point for yourself to have that awareness to, find comfort in your own body and start learning to work with yourself. That's the starting point to feeling empowered in your own body and working with yourself. And as a result, your performance, your health will always improve when you focus that as your main intention. So I know that there's so many gold nuggets you could take away. If there's anything that you would like to share with us that you learned, please tag us on social media. Her handle will be in the show notes, as well as Body by Boss LLC. We would love to hear any takeaways. And thank you so much for tuning in. Darion, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll see ya.